Hey, good morning and welcome to Breakthrough Walls. I'm Ken Walls and I'm your host. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I have the one and only Jeff C. West on the show. And he is a really good dude. Actually lives here in Texas too, which makes him an even better dude. I met him through Bob Burg, and Jeff and Bob recently wrote a book together. We're going to be talking about his life story and everything in between and help you have a breakthrough. But here's what I want you to do first is I'd like you to share this out. Let's get a bunch of people on here. Share this out. This guy is filled with it. Let's get a bunch of people watching. Jeff C. West is with us. Hang tight. Okay, we are back. Let me get Jeff on here. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, my friend. I'm so glad to be here. It's such an honor. Thank you so much.
I am very happy to have you here. We have Facebook users saying hi to me. And I don't know who that is, but identify yourself. So Jeff, I've interviewed over 550 celebrities and entrepreneurs and over the last 5.5 years. It's just been unbelievable. And I got to tell you that I started this show literally to help myself and others have a breakthrough in life. And I was in a kind of a stuck situation, and for me it's worked, and I know we've helped a lot of other people along the way. So I always like to start with you telling everybody where you were born and raised. Where did it all begin for you?
I am originally from a little town in northwest Georgia, Dalton, Georgia. That's
Okay.
the hometown, home state. And I laugh and I tell everybody I grew up most of my life about 1.5 miles down a dirt road, kind of in the valley between a couple of mountain areas. Still have a lot of friends back in that area as well.
I used to live in Kennesaw, Georgia, so I know exactly where Dalton is. It's the carpet capital of the world, actually. Most
It
people.
is. If you've walked on anything, which most of us have, you've
Yeah.
walked on something that came from Dalton, Georgia, I'm
That's
sure.
right. Amen. That's the truth. It's where you can go get really good pricing on carpet if you ever in the market.
Absolutely.
Did you grow up in the carpet business or?
I personally, the only work in that industry that I ever did is one summer. I don't remember what year in college I was in, but one summer between, two of my college years, I worked at a place that made sample books for the carpet salespeople to go out and do their thing. But my family, both my mother, my father, and my sister, all worked in that industry. And my
Wow.
little brother got out of town. He went more of a military career, but yeah, it's prevalent in the family, let's say.
Yeah. Wow. So for you growing up so you grew up there, you went to school there and everything in Dalton, Georgia. So
Right.
what was it like for you it's a beautiful area, by the way. It's just gorgeous. All the pines and it's just beautiful. But what was it like for you growing up out there in Dalton, Georgia?
It was such a blessing in so many ways. Dalton is not a huge town. It's a decent sized town. It was smaller back the number of years ago that I'm talking about now, which is I'm getting older. It's over a half century ago, and
Right. Right. Yeah, I
but
get
it was such a blessing because it was a time where you could go out and play, and you didn't worry so much about your kids getting. Parents today have different worries than my parents did back then, for sure. I
Amen. I have a 13-year-old. I know.
Yeah,
No.
and, I always laugh and say I grew up in a very non-affluent lifestyle, which meant that I got really creative. We didn't have to have all the latest bells and whistles. We made our own fun. We'd go out and we'd
Yeah.
ride our bikes all day on a Saturday, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was just such a blessing in so many ways. But still, good people there. Oh gosh, when I get back home and I get to connect with old friends, and I've made a lot of new friends actually the last few years in Dalton as well. It's just been such a blessing. My sister still lives there and love her to death.
Wow.
I have cousins that live there,
Well,
and
Dalton has 3 or 4 exits off of I-75, I believe. I mean, it's not a small town. It's right. It's
it does. It has more now than it did when I was growing up. But
yeah,
if you
right.
remember that drive, I always laugh and say, when we grew up in Dalton, we went to Chattanooga, Tennessee to have fun. And if you really wanted to get in trouble, you went to Atlanta.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I-75, as it would go up there, I'm old enough that I remember when they completed I-75 through there.
Wow.
And my the house that I still consider my home there, we lived in a lot of places, but we lived in one place for about 8 years, and I actually 9, I guess. But it was I could walk to I-75 through the woods and be there in 15 minutes. So
Wow. I mean, and yeah, that whole area, and I think Dalton is maybe what, an hour or so, maybe a little more from Kennesaw. The
all
Kennesaw,
right,
not
right,
maybe not even that far, but
right.
uh, so I know exactly. It's so beautiful over there.
It
Um,
is.
so talk about except for one thing, the red dirt, the red dirt.
Red clay.
So quick side story. I had a huge Newfoundland dog,
Mhm.
and she was a puppy, and our house had all white carpet, and we got a Christmas tree one year that came, you use the Christmas tree, it was packed in the dirt in the
Right.
thing, and then and then you replant it afterwards. It was a really cool concept. Apparently my Newfoundland wanted to drag the Christmas tree all over the house on our white carpet with red clay dirt in the ball thing, and I was like, oh my god, it was awful. It was awful. But anyway, the red dirt. That's the one thing I do not miss about Georgia is that red clay dirt, because it ain't coming out like
No, it makes an impression that lasts.
forever, right? Yeah. So, but anyway, so you grew up there, normal childhood, I assume, and graduate high school. Where'd you go to college?
I went to college in the state of Alabama at Jacksonville State University. I actually
Wow.
have a Bachelor of Science in Music Education. My original plan was to teach and be a band director somewhere. And
Okay.
then while I was finishing up that degree, I ended up getting a graduate assistantship in a school in Texas. It's Texas A&M Commerce. And
Wow.
that's where I got my master's in music composition. And I had decided pretty much I was going to either teach college or go into film scoring. And life has its way of making its little twists and turns. And I'd gotten married during the middle of that year, and I promised my wife at the time that I would have her back in school at Jacksonville State in the fall, and she could finish up her degree in psychology. She was a year behind me, basically.
Wow.
And at that time, there weren't any teaching jobs open in that area. So ended up in sales by default. And that's where I stayed my whole working career: sales management, working for myself. That's where I stayed my whole career.
So, okay, and you ended up back in Alabama?
Hmm. Yep. Went back
Okay,
to Alabama and worked there for a year, got promoted, moved back home to Georgia for a little while. Then I came to Texas 34 years ago.
and didn't leave. I
Yep.
I I understand, trust me. So you went to, you got where did you get into sales? Was it when you were back in Alabama?
Right.
Okay,
The,
what did you
the
start selling? What was your first sales job?
first sales job was for a musical instrument company, which
Okay,
was kind of somewhat using my degree, and I would do some clinics for band programs and all of that. But yeah, they worked for a man who changed my life. And if there's time to get into that story, I'll tell you more about that later.
please. Yeah.
Uh, it's a guy named Jack Amberson. And Jack is still one of my life heroes. I worked for him for maybe 2 or 3 years. I don't remember the exact length of time, but he was my sales manager in that musical instrument company. And he taught me how to do a lot of things in sales, and he got me reading and learning and all that, which was huge for my career.
Yeah.
But the most important thing I learned from Jack has nothing to do with business, but it has everything to do with business and life. And that year, well, I was out here in Texas getting my master's degree, and I knew there weren't going to be any teaching jobs open close to the college that my wife needed to go to.
Yeah.
Jack had gotten in touch with me to see if I wanted to work for him and do the sales job. And he said, "Why don't you come out here on your spring break? Spend the week with me. You can stay at our house and just travel with me while I do the job. And then if it's something you want to do, great. If it's not, great." And so I stayed at his house in Alexandria, Alabama, with him and his
Wow.
wife, Sharon, and their two kids, Becky and Ted. And I
Wow.
think Ted was in the first grade and Becky was even younger. And Ken, he changed my life because every morning we'd be sitting around the coffee table, drinking coffee, getting ready to go. And I'm guessing this was around 6 or 7 in the morning. And his kids would come in, they'd run in there in their pajamas, jump up into his lap, and he gave them both big hugs, big kisses. And he said something that I had never actually heard. And I need to come back and clarify that in a second. But every morning, uh, he told his kids two things. He gave them a hug and a kiss, and he said, "I love you so much, and I am so glad God picked me to be your daddy."
Mm.
Now, I know my parents loved me, Ken. That's not wasn't the issue. They fed me, they clothed me, they
Yeah.
did what they needed to do.
Yeah.
But we weren't a family that did that. And when I watched a grown man, a man's man by every definition of the word, do that with his kids, it changed how I saw the world. And later on, when I had my two daughters, they grew up with me doing that same thing with them. And of course, their mom was great too.
Yeah.
And that's just how they've grown up. I've been hopelessly and helplessly in love with my daughters since the day they were born. And
Wow.
so being able to openly express that to them, it broke the cycle, which had probably been going on for generations in my own family, where people didn't do that. And now
Wow.
I've watched them do that with their children. I see my grandchildren getting loved like that too, and it just blesses my
Amazing.
heart so much.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Especially if you didn't grow up with it.
Right,
And
right,
I can relate to that. So and this is the musical instrument company, right?
correct, right.
Okay.
He was the
So
general manager for the company.
what's that?
He was the general manager for that company, yeah.
Okay. And so you took the sales position.
Mhm.
You and that that was in Alabama though, right?
It was in Alabama. I did well the first year. I made 50% more in sales than I would make teaching that first year, even with a master's degree and a band director's stipend. And
Wow.
so they promoted me to Georgia. They had a location there, and I ran their Georgia operation for about 3 years before I left that industry. But you always look back. I say life is lived forward, but understood backwards. I think that's a quote from Kierkegaard. And
Yeah.
and when I was going through things at the time, it wasn't the way I planned it, but as I look back, oh, it was such a blessing.
I mean, Steve Jobs said that the you can only connect the dots by looking backward,
That's
right?
right.
So it's the truth. So I've been in sales my entire life, and so I love interviewing sales experts, quite frankly. Um, and so talk about. It sounds like you had success in that company. Talk about what attributed to your success. I remember when I first got in sales, I was working at the Honda factory building cars, and I thought, I'm gonna go. I met some very wealthy salespeople. I thought I'm gonna get into sales. 30 days later, I'll have the $50 million in the bank that, and I can just retire in my early 20s. Right.
It's the way it works
So
for all of us.
right. But I think we all have those thoughts, but the reality was I didn't know anything about selling. I was an uneducated idiot. And I'm like, oh God, I'm drowning now. And that's when I got into the Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, all of that.
Right.
But talk about what attributed to your success so quick. It sounds like you quickly excelled.
I
in
did in some respects, but in some respects, I still too had so much to learn.
yeah,
Being around Jack was good. Jack got me started reading about sales and
yeah,
success and all of that, so that was helpful. That's where I read my first parables, which has been the type of book that I write mostly.
yeah,
I, but it was because I wasn't afraid of hard work, and I went out there and just did the job. I had my first full-time job working 40 hours plus per week when I was 14 years old, I think. It was in the summer, and then I would work part-time during the school year.
yeah,
And it wasn't, it was by choice on my part, but I didn't want my mom to have to pay for everything that I wanted to do, and she couldn't have, and so I needed to do that.
yeah,
But then after I left the musical instrument industry, I ended up in the industrial sales industry in the Atlanta, Georgia market.
yeah,
And that's where I really began to develop my skill set. And again, I continued my learning. Same people that you just talked about. Brian Tracy actually endorsed my first book, even so. I've been following him forever.
yeah.
And it was at that point that I really began to stretch my wings. Uh, I was in the industrial uniform industry. Out of a company was actually out of Griffin, Georgia, but I primarily worked in the Atlanta area. Uh, they had some pretty good training there as far as what you needed to do. And long story short, after about 3 years, two of us out of that branch were in the top three in the nation. And we were it was so funny. That's a very capital intensive business. So when a salesperson opens up a new client relationship, the company spends a lot of money to buy the uniforms and deliver them. And there were more than 1 year that they sent Scotty, the other salesman that was doing so well. They would send us off to other locations because we had maxed out what they could spend, and we would go help other locations and sell there. And then that's the industry that brought me back to Texas. Actually, I got a promotion and moved to Denton, Texas, and ran a branch there. About 2 years later, we were sold, and that long story short, I ended up in an uncomfortable situation for about 18 months, and then I started my insurance career, and that's where I stayed the rest of the time.
Okay, so that's an interesting move. And Denton is about, I think, 20-30 minutes from where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah, we were
Um,
laughing about that before. My daughter lives, probably 10 or 15 minutes from you.
oh my goodness, that's amazing. So the company got sold, and then what made you go into insurance? I mean, I think about industries that I would never want to have to sell in.
Right,
I'm
right.
sorry. And I have a lot of clients that are in insurance. I love you guys if you're watching. I just couldn't imagine. I mean, there's so many, it's such a competitive market, and so many. What in the world made you go, I need to get into insurance?
This is gonna sound a lot less flashy than you might think, but
Oh,
here's the real story behind the scenes. The uniform company that bought us out, they were a great company, but that buyout didn't really work well for me, partly because of the way I responded to it. And
uh-oh.
at the time, I wanted to blame everybody but me. But the truth with both of us, Ken, and with everybody is our real determining factor is
Yeah.
more about what's between our ears than what comes through our eyes.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so it was, I didn't respond well. And after about 18 months, including multiple commission structure changes and territory issues and
Yeah.
all of that, I walked in one day and I called the general manager, actually the sales manager on the phone. I said, I'm going to swing by the office. You and I need to have a conversation. And when I got there, I began to rant. I walked into their office and I literally, it was not a pretty picture. I wouldn't even begin to tell your audience what I actually said that day, but let's
Yeah.
just say I could kind of hear the old Johnny Paycheck tune in the background, take this job
Yeah, right.
and
Right. Right.
I walked out of there an unemployed man. I
Wow.
had it, and I
Yeah.
I had gone from making about 60 grand a year in 1990, 91-ish,
Yeah.
uh, to making about 20 grand a year with that new company. And it wasn't all their fault, but some of it was. But
Yeah.
again, it's all my responsibility. So I quit. I didn't have another job lined up. And I was looking in the newspaper, I guess it was the Dallas Morning News, saw an ad for the insurance carrier that I went with. And I called up and I interviewed. The biggest reason that I chose that industry is I knew with my personality, it was time for me to work for myself. And
Yeah.
that was the industry everybody was an independent contractor. So you didn't have a boss, you didn't have employees, you had to pay your own taxes, you did everything
Yep.
yourself,
Yep.
which is really what I was more suited for all along. And I finally had the confidence that, well, I've been selling successfully for other people. I should be able to successfully sell for myself.
Yep.
And so it was that combination of drive to work for myself. I jokingly tell people that I'm much better at shaving the boss's face than kissing the boss's foot.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
so, and
Right.
so that was the main choice that I did. And I ended up being a district manager for that company in Denton pretty soon, actually.
What type of insurance was it?
It was
P&C
employee
or
benefit related, and it
oh,
was.
okay.
I don't know if I know on certain shows I do say brands and others I don't say brands, but if it's okay, I'll even say the name of
I
the
don't
company.
care. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, well, the company was Aflac, and
Okay.
it was a voluntary insurance program that went into employee benefit
Yeah.
programs,
I have a good
supplemental.
friend that worked for Aflac for years.
Oh,
Yeah.
you want to say the first name? I bet I know him.
She's up out of near Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, then I
It's
wouldn't know her then.
Carrie is yeah.
Yeah,
She's been with them. She's no longer with them, but she was with them for
right.
a long time. Yeah.
Technically, I still have a contract. I retired 10 years ago. I was a state manager in the Houston area for the last 10 years
Wow.
of my career.
Wow.
Retired
With
from that
Aflac.
industry. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And I retired at 54 years old, and that's a good thing in some respects. I mean, it's nice to be able to do that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I needed to do something, so I immediately went out and started speaking and writing books and stuff. So that was, it was a great career for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's where you went to Aflac and you stayed with Aflac the entire time?
Right.
Wow.
Never did anything else in the insurance industry unless Aflac lined up an arrangement. Like when there was Aflac wanted to get into the dental insurance early on in my career, so they worked with a company called Emeritus. Well, then I was appointed with Emeritus.
Yeah.
But primarily it was just all Aflac. So.
And you were an independent contractor.
Even as a state manager, I was. They've now made all the state managers employees. They call them market directors instead of state sales coordinators, but they're all employees. And that decision was coming down the pike, which was one of the reasons I retired.
Yeah.
And I've been talked to about certain things, and I always come back to the same point. Guys, I'm better at shaving the boss's face. I'm not good at taking orders. Just, somebody would tell me something, and they'd say, well, Jeff, we think you ought to do that this way. And if it made sense, I would do it. But if it didn't, I would say, I don't think so, Sparky. And that's not a good thing for an employee.
They don't like that. They don't like that. They like yes men, yes women.
Great company, though.
So what? Okay, along the way, I'm trying to. I'm not trying. I'm going to segue into something. Along the way of what is that? 30-year span?
30 plus. I started in sales in 82 and I retired in 2014. So 32 years, I guess.
Geez. Okay. So you spent all these years in sales and sales management. And I'm assuming that part of your role was recruiting and developing people.
Sure.
And I've been in the beginning of many businesses and bootstrapped every single one of them. How did you get, because there had to be lean times. There had to be times when you were like, hey, we can't even afford peanut butter and jelly this week. Like, right. Like there had to have been lean times where you're like, I don't know if we're going to make it. I think we might all die right now. Like this might be it. But how did you get through those lean times in the beginning? And I don't know if there were any roller coasters throughout your career, but how did you get through that?
That's a great question. And then there's multiple different avenues I could go with it.
Yeah.
Early on in sales, I struggled a little bit, but more about learning how to live off fluctuating incomes. And when I was in the musical instrument business, it wasn't fluctuating. They paid me a draw against commissions. We settled up at the end of the year and they wrote me a check.
Yeah.
But with everything else, it was always fluctuating. And so learning how to handle your money when your income is not, it has a lot of variation, that can be a challenge.
Yeah.
But the by far the worst time that I went through was during that point where the company that I came to Texas with was bought out by a competitor. And because my income dropped drastically during that time, and I thought I needed a job so I wouldn't quit and go do something else until the last button was pushed, or as a friend of mine says, "Uh-oh, my give a crapper just broke. I don't care anymore."
Yeah.
So,
There's a country song called "My Give a Damn Is Busted."
yeah,
Right.
that I had to get to that point. But
Right.
during that time, we were going under financially. I literally, I had, if you had checked my credit back in 1993 when I started with Aflac,
Yeah.
you'd have found 23 debts that were just horrible black marks on my career.
Yeah.
I'd even been advised to go bankrupt. And I laugh about this. I write a little bit about this in the preface to the new book. I didn't go bankrupt for two reasons. Number one, I felt obligated to go back and pay those debts. And that's not to judge anyone who has filed bankruptcy. I know there's
Right.
legitimate reasons for it.
Yeah.
In my case, these were personal debts that I owed, and I just felt like I needed to go back and do that, which, spoiler alert, about 2 years after I started with Aflac, I had everything paid off and we bought a really beautiful home in Denton.
Wow.
But the second reason I didn't go bankrupt is the attorney who told me I should. He said I would need to write him a check for $1,200. And I said, dude, if I had $1,200, I wouldn't even be talking to you about this.
Right. Right.
I was too broke to go bankrupt. Go figure that one out. But how I stayed in the mix is, even when I started in the insurance industry, my income would fluctuate drastically. Your income in any sales business where you're on commission, there's always a lag time. For most people, it's going to vary, but for mine, it was 2 weeks. I'd go out and make calls, get things going, get the new company lined up, everything gets done, and then I get paid. So it was at least 2 to 4 weeks was the sales cycle.
Yeah.
And what happens to most people, including me as a rookie, is you make a sale, you get fat and happy, and you quit to prospecting, and all of a sudden your income follows the other direction too. When your activity level goes down, so does your income.
Yeah.
So during that time, I began to dig my way out of what was going on. It took me a bit, but we had moved our family from a nice middle-class neighborhood just south of Denton, Texas, where it was on a cul-de-sac, and my kids were riding bicycles in the cul-de-sac with their friends and playing, and we had to move out. And I moved into a mobile home that I'm almost exaggerating, Kim, when I call it a mobile home. It was old. It was this dingy brown stain. The floor was falling through in parts. The gas appliances looked almost dangerous. It was not a pretty picture. And my girls went from having their own bedroom to sharing a room in a tiny mobile home that when I would go in there at night to kiss them goodnight, my legs would literally touch both beds. I was kind of moving in between them and to kiss them back goodnight.
So I'm going to interrupt you here and
Yeah.
say the greatest sales, the biggest sale that you have made in your career is convincing your wife to stay with you.
Oh,
right? Because I've been there, man. I have been there. I get that. I totally get that. Wow.
Well,
wow.
What got me out of that mess, and I'll never forget this. And I was the house we had moved out of south of Denton. The owner of the house we'd been renting, and he said we could leave things in the storage in the garage there until the realtor sold the house because they wanted to sell the house, and they'd let us know and come pick the rest of the stuff up, so I didn't have to find a place to store a lot of stuff. And the realtor sold the house, didn't get in touch with me. Not completely their fault, because when you got bill collectors hounding you all the time, you don't necessarily take every call. And so
I don't know what you're talking about.
no clue. Nobody that's ever been in sales does. So, but and what happened is both my girls' bicycles were in there, and they were given away to Goodwill. And it was heartbreaking for me to have to tell those girls. My girls were 9 and 5 when I started in the insurance industry. And when that happened, and having to tell them that their bikes had been given away and I couldn't take them to Walmart and get any more. It was gut wrenching. And I remember the day I did it. We were living in the mobile home. Uh, I had told them, and then I went outside and stood on the front porch. We had one of those old tin roof front porches on the mobile home,
Yeah.
and it was a little bit chilly, rainy, and I couldn't go back inside. Now the kids were very resilient. They had
Yeah.
stopped crying and gone on about their business, but I couldn't stop crying, Ken. I was on that front porch just saying, I can't keep doing this. I can't. And so I drew a line in the sand, and from that point forward, my career took off. And it's in my branding now that I use a lot when I'm speaking or working with sales teams. It's called Fusion Points. Engage the science of persistence. And I won't go into the neurology here unless you want me to later. But
Well,
the,
yeah, because Bob said make sure that I get you to talk about that. So we're gonna, if Bob Burg says to do something, you do it.
well, he's a very good mentor and friend. But
Yeah.
what happened was basically that a fusion point is uh, it comes out of my study of how people make decisions. One of the things that always confused me in sales leadership is how I could take two people that on paper looked identical. They You look at them and say, okay, leadership skills, work effort, it's there. You put them out in sales. One makes the decision to persist,
Yeah.
and they become very successful, while the other one makes the decision to quit. And you wonder how does that decision process work? So I began to delve into that as I began to brand and go out and speak. And I came across the works of a guy named Dr. Antonio Damasio. He's a professor of neuroscience for the University of Southern Carolina, Southern California, USC, and an
Yeah.
adjunct professor at the Salk Institute. And he's a professor of neurology, and he studied how the decisions get made. And what he found was this: all decisions, without fail, are made with a combination of logic and emotion in our brain. And those parts are controlled by two different areas of the brain.
Yeah.
They have to communicate or decisions don't get made. And that, I mean, he did a study on that. And what I also found out was every time we have an emotion happen in that part of our brain, something our body does is kind of unique. It sends an electric signal down into our chest, into our stomach. We have a physiological change based on the emotion we just experienced. Now, if that's a negative emotion, like fear, thinking you're going to miss out on something, some sort of thing that we would classify as negative, that electric signal goes down in our body. It creates a somatic marker that we don't like. It's a feeling of uneasiness. We don't like it. And all we want to do is get away from it.
Mm.
And since all decisions are a combination of logic and emotion, whatever logic you're trying to combine with that emotion at the time,
Yeah.
it creates what I call a collision point. And we naturally push away from it. We're not going to take the next step. We don't
Right.
like this.
Yep.
But the opposite is also true. When we experience a positive emotional experience in our brain, it still produces a somatic marker, sends that electric charge into our body, but it's something we enjoy. If it's a feeling of love, joy, a sense of belonging, a sense of accomplishing, a sense of knowing, okay, what I'm doing means something,
Yeah.
then it creates a different kind of physiological response. We like it. We want to continue that, and we're definitely willing to move forward.
Yeah.
And so when you combine in the decision-making process that positive emotional experience with logic of what you're trying to get done,
Yeah.
then it creates a fusion point. And a fusion point, when that happens, it's that unique moment in time where logic and positive emotion merge and they ignite. And what they do, they produce loyalty, they produce persistence, they produce the person you're visiting with, if it's a sales context, that makes them comfortable taking the next step. It's a literal science with that. Well, back on that, we were talking about the mobile home day.
Yeah.
What I did in my own world was I created the most positive fusion point. Didn't have the terminology back then. This came later. But I created the most positive fusion point with how much I loved my family and
Yeah.
how much I could not keep letting them down.
Right.
And so when I combined that with the logic of what I was trying to get done, there was no stopping me. And I would do things, of course, this is telling my age, it really is, but I would do things like carry pictures of my daughters around in my daytimer. I didn't have
Right.
my phone, I could just scroll into it. I had to carry them with me. And every time I wanted to make a sales call anywhere, It didn't matter if they said yes. It didn't matter if they said no. It really didn't matter if they liked the contact, they didn't like the contact, because every time I was looking at my girls and I knew that I was doing what I needed to do to take care of the two most precious souls I'd ever met.
Okay, so I have a question. And I'm going to tell you, I had Brian Tracy on this show, and he spent almost an hour and a half talking to me on the show. And I asked, he's always all about, matter of fact, I posted a little clip yesterday. He's like, write it down, write it down, write it down. Right. And I remember the psychology of selling. I
Right.
wore out the cassettes, got the CDs, and so I've listened to that 1,000 times. But I said to Brian, I said, people are going to hear this stuff that you're talking about, the affirmations, and they know they need to do it. Right.
Right.
I said, but 95, 98% are, and they know they need to, but they're
Right.
not going to. How do you get them, those people, that 98%, how do you get them to start taking action and he goes, you can't. I go, that's not the answer I was hoping for, Brian. Like, what? He goes, you can't change people. They got to get into enough pain to change themselves first.
Right.
And so my question is, because I love the science of neurology and kinesiology and all of, right?
Right.
What, in your opinion, is there something that you can do with this scientific information? Is there something that you can do to convince people to move, go? For the love of God and everything else that's holy, take freaking action. I've said that to salespeople and they quit.
Well, the answer to your question is actually yes, you can. And it's so funny. I like you. I studied so much about the psychology of sales from people like Brian, and I would learn what they did, and then I would just start duplicating it because that's just was my nature.
Yeah.
And but the truth is, with the psychology of sales, we all know that it works. We all knew it back then. We just didn't understand why it worked.
Right.
And so when you combine that neurology process where okay, this is a default setting in our brains, it's going to happen. Let's work with that and let's do it. Let's influence that. Yeah, you can. And what I would do in those shoes, Ken, is I would base the way I related to the person I'm visiting with on how I perceive them as far as how they relate. If they're more into the emotional context of life, if all that, then you can just talk about the psychology of sales. You can talk about all that, and it's going to work because they get it. There are a lot of people that when you talk about psychology and things, they don't put as much stock into it as maybe they should.
Right.
So with those, you go with the detail part. It's like if you're telling if they're in the logic side of their brain or the emotional context of their brain, and you relate to them at that level. Because as you well know, if you're trying to get people to take action, you can't get anybody to do anything. You can't push them. You can't do anything, but you can influence how they make the decision. And that's one of the things that I teach in the Fusion Points business model is whether it's a sales context or whether it's developing your organization, whether it's support staff, sales staff, it doesn't really matter. It all works the same.
Yeah.
When you intentionally create an environment that's constantly combining positive emotional experiences with the logic of what you're trying to get done, you get buy-in from both sides of the brain then.
Yeah.
And you buy in from people who feel like they really gravitate toward one or the other. And I say sides euphemistically. The left brain, right brain thing isn't exactly the way the science works, but it is different parts of the brain for sure.
Right.
But when you do that, then you can have the opportunity to influence how they make the decision. And that's the key. And as you're working with any kind of organization, getting that concept right. That's one of the things that when I'm teaching and I'm working with a group about fusion points, my biggest goal is when I get through, they understand why it works and it makes sense to them logically as well as emotionally. And so then they can implement the process and ad lib within that process when they need to.
I just, I know what I'm getting ready to say. If you can't relate to it, then you've never been in sales management. And this whole thing's been a lie. I'm just kidding. So you're like, oh my God. So here's the thing. I don't even know how many resumes I've looked at, thousands and thousands, just like you. And
Right.
you look at this and you're like, this is my ace right here. This guy or the gal or whoever. This one is the ace. You interview them. You're, oh my God, they're gonna kill it. I'm gonna be able to retire just on my residuals off of that person. Like, holy crap. And they come in and they do nothing.
Right.
Nothing. They won't get up. They're scared. You can detect fear of
Right.
rejection, the knocking on whatever it is, right? And then you get somebody that I know, and he's a Facebook friend of mine, worked for me years ago. Just I was in West Virginia, and this guy was just a good old boy. And I'm like, dude, if you go out and knock on doors, you knock on 10 doors, you're gonna sell 2 or 3, and you're gonna make a lot of money. He
Right.
went out because he believed me, didn't know any better, and made $4,000 a week. I'm like, I mean, he was like my hero, and I just thought, oh God, he's not even gonna. But he went out and just killed it. So
Right.
what is the difference there? That I'm telling you, man, that is the. If you have the answer to that and you can figure that out, you're going to be the wealthiest man in the world, because that's crazy.
Well, it is exactly the same question I had when I left the insurance industry and why I began to go down this road as far as investigating why they made the decisions they made.
Mm,
And so what I'll tell you in that instance, Ken, is when you're recruiting into a sales team, you need to, I always coach people, don't try to sell someone on coming on board. Do the same thing that you really should be doing in any sales conversation. You ask the right questions.
yeah.
You get that candidate to tell you things like, and one of my favorite questions that I would always ask, I would look at their resume. You see all of that. I would do those things, and I would get to know them in the interview process, talk to them a little bit about what they'd done and what their skill set was. But there was one question that I always asked in an interview, and I would always leave the room and let them think about it before I came back and they answered with me. I would say I was going to get some coffee or whatever, but I wanted them to have a couple of minutes to organize their thoughts. But I asked them this question. I would say, Ken, I want you to think about this. And when I come back and answer the question, I would like to know something very simple. If I had a magic wand and I could wave it and create the ideal position for you, a career choice that would be something you would want to do for the rest of your life, tell me what it would include. Not just about the company or the industry. Tell me what your day-to-day things would. What do you want it to bring to you and your family? Tell me what you want from a career. I'd leave the room, come back, and what they would do, Ken, is they would sit there when I came back and say, well, I'm looking for a career that does this, 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 and this. They would have their thoughts pretty well organized.
Yeah.
And what I would say to them at that point was, if what they wanted didn't match what I did, I would tell them up front, I don't think this is the right place for you. It won't bring you what you just said. But if they told me things that really my career choice, what I was recruiting for, did line up with that,
Yeah.
I would say, you've got a great opportunity here. I've got some good news for you. The things that you mentioned that you want in an ideal career, this one matches up pretty well with it. You said you wanted this, we do that. You said, go down the list.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
then I would say, here's what I'd like for you to do. I want you to think about this for a couple of days. So then I want to, let's visit, and we'll talk about if it's the right choice for both of us to move forward. And that's a very similar thing that I would do in a sales conversation.
Yeah.
If you ask the right questions in a sales conversation,
Yeah.
a phenomenon happens that's just wonderful. If you know your stuff, you know where you're providing that value to the person you're speaking with.
Yeah.
If you ask the right questions, they will come back and tell you they need this, they're looking for that, this issue's bringing them problems. They'll tell you all the things that you could tell them yourself. I could sit there and say, well, this is a great career. You ought to be jumping all over this. You can make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, if I said it, or if someone says it in a sales context and I haven't already developed that know, like, and trust relationship,
Yep.
what will happen is they won't give themselves permission to just naturally accept that. They don't know me yet.
Right.
But if I ask the right questions, and they tell me the things, well, then it's coming out of their mouth. So if I say it may be suspect, but if they say it, it's the gospel truth. And so my goal was always to ask the questions and do that. But in the sales context, what I would do then when they came on board, I didn't intentionally do it back then by knowledge. I did it by gut. And now that I know the neurology of it all, I teach people how to do it intentionally. You combine that positive you combine continuous positive emotional experiences
Yep.
in the context of the logic that you're trying to get accomplished. You connect the two, and you get them into an environment where they want to stay. And if they want to stay long enough, then they can become successful. And once they become successful, you can't stop them. It's awesome.
Wow. I used to give this book out, and I know you're an author, and everybody should buy all of your books. But I found this years ago, this little tiny network marketing book written by a guy named Alan Pease called Questions Are the Answers. And there's only one little part of and it's because he talks about body language and all of that. And
Right.
but there's this one part that talks about exactly what you were just saying, like asking the right questions. And sometimes though, and I think you probably have it down to a science, but sometimes it's hard to read somebody. So knowing what question to ask is sometimes difficult.
It definitely takes some thought process. And what I coach sales teams on is this: you start where you bring the most value to the person. In you hear the buzzword value proposition all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I think most companies, although they're well intended, I
Yeah.
think they kind of miss the mark on what a value proposition is, because
Yeah.
they'll start thinking our value proposition is we do this, they give us that, that's the transaction, but then we also do this and we do that and we do this, more of a value add kind of thing. And all that's great, it really is, but it's really not what I consider the value proposition. Your value proposition, when you get down to it, is how the person sitting across from you, how their life changes, how it gets better in some form or fashion, either professionally,
Yep.
personally, whatever. It gets better because they're in a relationship with you, doing business with you.
Yeah.
And so it's really about how their world changes. So when you get down to it, a value proposition isn't about us at all. It's not about our company. It's not about our product. It's not even about how great as salespeople we are, even though we're all great. We know that we're the good guys, but but
Right. Right.
it's about them. In essence, it's their value from our proposition. And so you start there when you're developing those questions. You start thinking, okay, what is their value from our proposition? How does their world get better? And then you start thinking, okay, how could I ask the right question? What question would I need to ask them
Yeah.
so that they would spend the time thinking through their issues and then verbalize that back to me? Like one in the employee benefit arena, one of my very favorite questions. I would ask a lot of questions going into the discovery section of the sales conversation.
Sure.
And but there was a question that I kind of finished up on in that discovery section. And again, we were in the employee benefit arena. So I would ask the employer, I would say, a lot of companies this day and time are having to make the tough call to either cut back on their benefits program. Some of them are cutting them out completely. And yet you still go to the expense, you still go to the effort to make that a reality for your employees. Do you mind if I ask you, why do you go to that extra effort? Why is this so important to you? And when I would do that, they literally would sit there and say, well, we offer benefits because we want to attract the right workers. We want to keep our workers. We want to take good care of our employees and all that. And the reason I did that is I wanted them to think through those issues. Now, I could have told them, look, if you're doing business with us, we're going to enhance your benefit program. You can attract better workers. You can retain those workers. You can get so much more. We even created tax breaks for them that they got each week.
Right.
So we could tell them that. But if I asked them that question, they would tell me that. And when they would tell me that, and I could come back and say, well, Ken, there's some things that you've said you wanted to accomplish that are really important to you that we can actually help you. And I would walk through how we did that. The closing ratio, when you do it that way, was it was huge for me.
Well, and
You
it's
know,
because they're selling themselves. You're not selling them.
right,
You turn
right.
into an order taker, which is the best sales place to be in.
Well, you
Right.
think about it, at its very core, sales is being focused on the other person and
Amen.
being able to understand and find out how their world becomes better with that
Yeah.
relationship. And then you help them get what they need. You've got a potential client who's got an issue they'd like to have solved.
Yeah.
You've got a company or a service. Either you might be that company or service yourself, or you're working for someone, but you've got that solution and you put them together and you're like the old fashioned matchmakers at that point. Yeah,
That's
you put
it.
it together, you just get paid for doing it.
That's it. Bob Donnell asks a great question here. What characteristics and behaviors have you confirmed are key to the successful candidate?
In a sales position,
Yeah.
I would say, Bob, that's a great question. I would say that the things that I looked for the most were their leadership skills, their work habits, and I would look for signs in their resume. The first step was, of course, just the resume. I would look for signs in that resume that showed me they had been in successful leadership positions in the past. And I would look for how early their first job. That was one of the questions I always asked every candidate. What's the first job you ever had? How old were you? What did you do? Because I knew from my anecdotal experience
Yeah.
that if they'd started work early and they had kept a job and they stayed after it, that they tended to understand a work ethic better. Like in my case, I
Yeah.
started working full time in the ninth grade, so
Yeah.
I understood working for a living.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. I would look for, in their school organizations or whatever, where did they get into leadership positions? Like
Yeah.
in my case, I was my college fraternity president, which I think actually made me the ringleader instead of the leader, but still.
Right. Right.
But I would look for those things. And then when I would get them in the interview process for that successful candidate,
Yeah.
I would be looking at how they interacted with me,
Yeah.
how their people skills were. Did they look me in the eye? Were they able to express themselves verbally fine? I would look for those things, and then I would just start asking questions about what they were looking for. And if they were the right candidate, those questions just kept making them move to the top of the stack. And I
That's
won't say that I was 100% successful at it, because any sales recruiter, sales manager that tells you they always got it right is lying to your rear end. I'm just going to tell you that up front. But, but,
right.
but it was definitely something where you're playing the percentages.
Yeah.
If I'm looking for certain characteristics and I know, okay, if they've got those, my percentage of helping that person become successful raise up,
Yeah.
then I knew I was on the right track. So,
There's a Tony Hsieh wrote a book about Zappos that he created Zappos, and in that he talks about, and I love this. I've never done it yet, but I love this idea. They would interview people, and they would the phone, I forget how they did it. The phone would ring and the manager would answer, okay, yeah, and hang up and go to the interviewee. He'd look at him and say, I got to get these extra chairs over here to another room. I'll be right back. And they'd get up and go grab the manager would grab the chairs and start heading out the door. If the interviewee didn't offer to help or get up and start helping, he would
they
come
didn't get
back
the
and
job.
say, hey, this isn't going to work out. So is that beautiful? Because
Yep.
that if they step up and start helping, that's somebody, it's a team player.
Right.
So talk about the book. I know you've written multiple books, and you're welcome to talk about all of them or any of them.
Okay.
But I know most recently you and Bob Burg wrote a book, and I'm assuming you have a copy.
I'm looking around right now to make sure that I do, and it's not on my desk. I'll show you this. It was one of the proof copies, but it's called Streetwise to Saleswise.
I'm
Become
sorry,
object-
my Apple Magic Mouse does weird thing. It kicked me out. Like,
Well, I noticed I was full screen. I thought you did that on purpose.
no, go ahead. Just show the book. I did. Did you show the book?
I did. I showed
Okay.
the
Okay.
top
Sorry.
of it. But the book is called Streetwise to Saleswise, Become Objection Proof and Beat the Sales Blues. And it's the story of a young man who was not in sales. The lead character is a guy named Thaddeus Tucker. And by the way, if you don't know it already, it's a business parable, a sales parable. I love to read parables. It's my favorite genre. So when I'm doing that, I will I get involved in the story. Then when what they're trying to teach me, the logic part, I retain it better. We all are the same way. It's that
Right.
combination of logic and positive emotion.
Yeah. Yep.
But in the book itself, the main character is Thaddeus Tucker. He's a kid that grew up on the streets of New Orleans, which is the venue for the geography for the book, and he's has a little bit of an inappropriate sense of humor, and he has a little bit of what's the right way to say this? His mouth gets him in trouble, and
Oh,
so
okay.
we get him fired pretty quickly on in another job that he had, and then he takes a sales job by default, and it's taking someone who's a little bit brash and a little bit immature and starting them from there and taking them through the process. It grows them as a salesperson and as an individual. And we've got such great characters. The story for the book literally came to me while I was sitting in New Orleans with a glass of Chianti on a balcony with my wife. We're having a late lunch, and I'm listening to a street busker sing, and the entire storyline came. Bob and I had already decided we were doing the book,
Oh
but
my God.
that's where it came to me. And so I've got multiple characters built in. My goal with any book, and same with the first one, The Unexpected Tour Guide, and the second one is said The Lady with the Blue Hair, which is actually a sales book. You'll love it.
Wow.
But that's my goal, is to write fiction that people would want to do anyway. But the characters are great. The story's fun. The sales teaching and the leadership teaching. We do a good job of showing how to recruit, how to lead a team, and how to learn the skills. It's a very well, it's a good faceted book. I'll just say that. We actually have something that's kind of been an outgrowth of that. Bob and I are now starting to do, along with Kim Anjali, we're starting to do live events in Florida and West Palm Beach called Saleswise Live, and we're branding it, and we're taking that book to that level. And it's a
Wow.
3-day event, and anybody who wants to do that, just I'm trying to think of what the link I have on there is. Just check out my website at jeffcwest.com, and you'll find us.
Just
So,
jeffcwest.com.
right.
I'm going to put that up on the screen.
And the URL for the book itself, go to Streetwise to Saleswise.com. It's in all the book retailers, but there's a special link there. If you want the hard copy of the book, there's a special link there. Ingram Sparks have given us some priority treatment.
Yeah.
People can click that link and buy it directly from Ingram Sparks. It cuts out the middleman. They get it much faster.
That is awesome. So awesome. So you have had an illustrious career, and you decided after retiring that you were going to start writing books, and I think that's phenomenal. um I think I personally think everybody should write some kind of a book.
Me
um
too.
it's, first off, it's very cathartic. You start uncovering things. You're like, oh my, I forgot about that, and it just a healing process, and it's a great process too. So
Right.
congratulations to you, Jeff. That's amazing. And to be able to partner up with somebody like Bob Burg, like, he's a legend, and so that's just amazing.
Well, thank you so much. When you were saying that just a second ago, it reminded me of something my writing coach, Bob Burg's co-author on the Go Giver series, is a guy named John David Mann. He's
Love
also
John.
my writing coach and a good friend to me.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said in our writing class, he says, I don't know if it's an original John thing or if it's something he was quoting, but he said, I write to find out what I think. Because as you're writing your book, you're writing a story, you start crystallizing things, and you really do begin to understand more about yourself. It's kind of an amazing phenomenon. But thank you so much for your compliments, Ken. I do appreciate that.
Well, I love John and his wife Anna. They're
Yeah,
amazing.
awesome.
They're amazing people.
Yeah,
And you couldn't ask for a better writing coach. Like,
I
he's
agree.
he's written like 4,000 books.
Well, I got tickled.
Unbelievable.
He's written at least 39, and I think
Yeah.
9 of them are New York Times bestsellers, and he's been doing novels, and he used to do mostly parables and memoirs and topical nonfiction, and now he's branched into novels. He's got 3 awesome novels out there, and he's now doing his own novel. I don't know if he's sharing any of that, but he's working on one that's just him now too. So it's amazing.
You're making me go. I need to reach out and chat with them and see how they're doing. I haven't talked to them
Yeah.
in a while, but
Yeah.
you know what? You're I love it. You know, something for me in sales or management has always been like, what's this person's energy about? And your
Mhm.
energy is incredible. So
Well, thank you.
thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom today and your story.
Right.
And everybody go to jeffcwest.com and get connected with Jeff and get his books. And I'm assuming there's a link to the new book on there.
There is. It's on the front page, and if they forget that, they can always go to the title, Streetwise to Saleswise.com.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
also, if you don't find what you're wanting, email me at jeff@jeffcwest.com. I'll find you. I'll help you. So,
Amen. I love that. Jeff, thank you for coming on today and sharing and just being awesome. It's
it's
been
been an
amazing.
honor. It's
Yeah.
been an honor, Ken. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, I'm going to end the live stream, but stay with me and I'll be right back. Everybody that watches today, if you didn't share this out, there is time to redeem yourself and go ahead and share this out so we can get a bunch of people watching. So everybody have an awesome day. Thanks so much. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.